What is the rub that Aaron Franklin uses in his briskets to make them so amazingly flavorful? For years, he's been saying that he's just been using salt and pepper on his briskets, but I ate at Franklin BBQ recently, and I was like, no, there's other ingredients in here besides salt and pepper, because it doesn't explain the flavors that I was picking up on. I was picking up on umami, tasty, citrusy flavors that was definitely not just from salt and pepper. So at first I thought it was MSG, and I actually used some MSG testing strips to test whether there was MSG in the brisket bark, but I determined that that is probably not the case, and Stacy Franklin actually responded to my email and she said, no, we don't add MSG to our briskets. So if it's not MSG, then what is the secret ingredient? Well, according to an interview with Aaron Franklin by Daniel Vaughn in Texas Monthly, it's been different things in the past, including Lowry's seasoned salt, but currently it's this: a barbecue rub with salt, mushroom powder, tomato powder, and other spices that's co-packed by Ballner's Fiesta Spices and private labeled and distributed by Franklin BBQ. Now, Daniel did refer to some ingredients that aren't in this barbecue rub that is supposedly on Franklin brisket, and they're actually ingredients in the steak spice rub, but I'm not going down that rabbit hole. Jeremy Yoder over at Mad Scientist BBQ tested the Franklin barbecue rub in a video, and he really liked the flavor and had some great thoughts on this subject. I'll link Daniel Vaughn's article, Jeremy's video, and a link to buy Franklin's barbecue rub in the description section below so you can test it out yourself. Now, I tested the Franklin barbecue rub and steak spice for glutamates, and I found that each one had ample amounts of it, probably from the mushroom and tomato powder. This would explain the results I got testing the Franklin brisket for glutamates and the umami flavor I tasted on the brisket. The tomato powder also imparts a citrusy flavor, which would explain the lemony tartness I tasted on the Franklin brisket. But I needed to test it out to be convinced, and there's also open questions like how much of this rub are they applying to their briskets? And are they dry brining their briskets overnight or for 24 hours or longer? Or are they just applying this rub and then throwing their briskets right on the smoker? So I did a test with these two choice briskets. For the first one, I did a coating of Franklin brisket rub. It's just salt and pepper. And then I added a heavy coating of the Franklin barbecue rub. That is supposedly the secret rub that Franklin uses on his brisket. I let that dry brine in the fridge for 24 hours. And then right before it went on the smoker, I reapplied some more of the barbecue rub because some of it had washed off. For the second brisket, I just did the same thing, but I didn't dry brine it. I just applied the rub and put it right in the smoker with the other one. Both briskets smoked for 12 hours until they hit an internal temperature of 190 degrees Fahrenheit. Then I plopped down some refrigerated tallow and put the brisket on it. This is how Jerby from Goldie's Barbecue did it in a video, and he worked at Franklin, so I thought, hey, couldn't hurt. After that, I wrapped it in butcher paper, I foiled it, and I held it at 150 for around 15 hours. Now, to be clear, this is not the way that Franklin BBQ prepares their briskets, but it's going to achieve similar results for the purposes of this test. And after 15 hours, I took the briskets out of my sous vide holding chest, and I got ready to cut into them. All right, this is the Franklin brisket that was not dry brined overnight. It just had the rub applied, and then it sat for maybe 30 minutes before I put it on the smoker. So I'm just going to flip this upside down to make sure it's thoroughly coated in all the tallow. And we'll open this bad boy up here. Ooh, that is looking nice. Wow. I'm liking the looks of that. Beautiful. Okay, let's give this a slice right down the middle. Slicing pretty nicely so far. Look at that. Looking good to me. Woo! All right, let's take a slice of this. And I'll take some point slices. I'll do some burnt ends there. It's slicing like a dream. The point is really well done. Now what they do at Franklin BBQ is they kind of get tallow on their hands, and then they put it on the slice, and then they arrange it on the platter. Let's give this a taste now. It's looking really nice. The fat is, oh my God, the fat is really well rendered. It smells smoky. Let's give it a shot. Really good, but before I give you my thoughts on it, I'm gonna have a taste of the flat. Oh yeah. Just got a big hit of the rub. Okay, what I can say is the flavor that I tasted here is consistent with what I tasted at Franklin BBQ, with one minor exception. It's consistent because it has a little bit of that citrusy tang on the side of your tongue that I wasn't able to account for just by assuming it was salt and pepper alone that was used on the Franklin brisket. So I think that is because in this rub there's tomato powder and there's also shiitake mushroom powder, paprika, some other spices. There's also sugar, so I think that is what is creating the umami sensation and also that sort of citrusy, sort of tart tang on the side of the tongue. However, it's not like the Franklin barbecue that I tasted in Austin in one big respect. It is not salty enough by any stretch of the imagination. This is salty, but it doesn't even approach the level of saltiness that I tasted at Franklin barbecue. So you guys saw how much salt I put on this brisket. It was a lot. And it still doesn't even come close to the saltiness that I got from the Franklin brisket when I was in Austin. So that's really interesting. But I'm interested to see if the dry brined overnight for 24 hours brisket is going to taste any saltier than this one. Okay, let's open this up. And again, this is the brisket that was dry brined for 24 hours in the Franklin rub. Let's be consistent. I'll flip it upside down like I did with the last one, just to get it thoroughly coated. Looks like another good one. Let's give this a slice down the middle. It's cutting very nicely. There you go. Ooh, a little bit juicier than the last one, I would say. Wow, look at that. Boom. That's crazy. Okay, let's get a slice of the flat here. Oh my Lord. They would never hire me at Franklin Barbecue with these knife cutting skills. And let's make some point slices. It looks really good. Take a look at that. It looks, I mean, the fat cap is a lot thicker, but it looks similar to the Franklin brisket that I had when I was in Austin. Oh, baby. Mmm. Ooh. Mmm. Holy shit. Whew. I'm gonna reserve my comments while I taste the flat. Mmm. That's a good flat. Okay, this brisket, the one that dry brined for 24 hours before I smoked it, it's 1,000 times better than the last brisket that I smoked. It is so much better. It is saltier. It is more tender. It is more moist. It has more flavor. It is juicier. Everything about this brisket is better. That could have been because this is just a better brisket in terms of quality, or I smoked it better. Could be a number of factors, but what I'm tasting here is way more similar to the brisket that I had at Franklin Barbecue, and the salt profile, most importantly, is definitely on point. It's a lot saltier because of that dry brine. So not only do I think this is how Franklin Barbecue is preparing their briskets, they're probably dry brining for at least overnight and probably up to 24 to 48 hours. I'm going to adopt this method going forward. I'm gonna always dry brine my brisket because it makes it taste way better. Okay, here are my overall thoughts on it. This is probably the rub that Aaron Franklin is using on his briskets, at least as of October 2022 when I was in Austin. The tomato powder explains the acidity that I tasted, and it's actually a really good addition because a lot of brisket really nails the fat and the salt flavor, but it doesn't really have a lot of acidity. So something like tomato powder or citric acid or even something crazy like dehydrated pickles or something like that could be a really good addition to brisket rub that just rounds out the flavor a lot more. Also, the mushroom powder and the tomato powder explains the umami flavor that I tasted on Franklin's brisket, and it also explains why my MSG test strips reacted for the presence of glutamates in the Franklin brisket. This rub also has glutamates in it in the form of mushroom and tomato powder, but I question whether these exotic ingredients are actually needed or whether you could just achieve the same results using MSG, which is what I usually use on my briskets. So I'm pretty confident now that this is the rub they're using on their brisket, but the more interesting question to me is how they're using this rub. Are they applying it ahead of time with just pure salt and then dry brining it for 24 to 48 hours, and then right before it goes on the smoker, are they just adding this extra layer of the barbecue rub after it's been dry brined in pure salt? How long is it dry brined for? Are they dry brining it at all? But based on this test, because the dry brine brisket was so much better and so much closer to the flavor profile of the Franklin brisket I tasted in Austin, I think that they are dry brining their brisket for some amount of time. I just don't know for how long or how much salt they're applying, because in this video, the brisket I tasted was salty, but it was nowhere near as salty as the Franklin brisket I tasted. So in terms of a conclusion for this video, Franklin BBQ is probably using this rub as their secret ingredient, if you could call it that, at this specific time. They might change it up in the future and use something different. And I'm also pretty sure that they're dry brining their brisket for some amount of time. The questions I'm left with are, how are their briskets so much saltier than the ones that I make and the ones that I made in this video? Even with all that salt you saw me add to the brisket, it's still not enough. That makes me suspect they're adding a lot of salt both before smoking the brisket and at the time that it's wrapped. Maybe there's salt added to the tallow mixture that the briskets are wrapped with. The second question I have is whether Franklin's is just using tallow to wrap their briskets or whether there's something else in the tallow. I already mentioned that there could be salt in there, but I also wonder if there's something like oil or butter or a butter blend added to it, because it was much too oily and buttery to be just pure tallow. And I've tasted a lot of pure tallow before, and it's way beefier than the tallow that I tasted in the Franklin brisket. It was like oily, it just had this luxurious mouthfeel, and it was buttery. So that makes me think that there's something else going on, but that's for another video where I'm going to test adding different things to the tallow mixture before wrapping and see if it tastes closer to what I experienced at Franklin BBQ. If you guys enjoy nerding out on barbecue like this as much as I do, then consider joining my Patreon page. I'll link it in the description section below. You'll get access to a private Discord chat server where you can get instant access to me anytime you want to ask me questions, and you'll also get access to a great community of people that are just as passionate about barbecue as you are. So I hope to see you there, and I'll definitely see you in the next video where we explore all things tallow mixture related. Hope to see you there, and happy smoking.